What is going on, Sharp Football family? It is your resident Swami of Konami, Rich Rebar, and we are here approaching just about 1 week out from the NFL Draft. And before we get going, if you are prepping for early fantasy drafts, our draft kit has everything you need to get ready for the 2026 season. Full rookie class breakdowns by me, position by position analysis, rankings, tiers, so much more. We're going to keep updating that with our analysis, all of our analysis as we approach the 2026 season. Go take a look at sharp.football. As part of bringing you guys that content leading into the draft, we've had some great guests lined up, and we have another great one on tap today. This is, I consider like a real good friend in the industry. We haven't talked a lot about this draft class, actually, probably the lightest amount of times we've talked about prospecting in any year since I've been doing it. But it is the great JJ Zachariason. JJ, man, what's going on, brother?
What's up? You're right. I realize we haven't had as much. Maybe that's why I'm excited to do this show, because we haven't talked about prospects as much as we usually do. But it might be indicative of the class that we're working with here. Where it's just a lot of dudes out there that we're not super excited about. But there's some guys out there that are cool.
Yeah, I mean, listen, we're just gonna have to line up and make picks. I have a couple rookie drafts that already started this week that draft pre-draft, and I feel like this year kind of more than ever, it's more of a Wild West, because I feel like more gamers are just kind of waiting on draft capital this year, and that's going to be like the ultimate North Star. And I'll ask you about that, in a second. But one of the big things that you have going on always is you do the big NFL draft guide, probably one of the best ones in the industry. I was checking that out. I want to ask you a little bit about that draft guide that you create and the model. Is just, first of all, I know that like ZAP model is what it's called for. Is ZAP an acronym for anything?
Yeah, Zachariason adjusted prospect model, of course.
Gotcha. All right, man. Yeah. And now I feel dumb, but yeah, it's like so I was thinking every time I hear the ZAP and I'm seeing like the lightning bolts, and it's like I was just thinking like get zapped,
I needed for a while I had another name for it that was really lame, and I was like I need to come up with something that's like snappy, and so we ended up going with ZAP.
Yeah, zappy in a sense.
There you go.
Yeah, and because when you broke in, you were doing the late round quarterback thing, and obviously you'll go check out JJ's work at lateround.com, and you can find him at YouTube at lateroundfantasyfootball.com. But like when you can't do like late round draft guide, right? Because then people are gonna think it's just like day 3 dudes, like random guys.
Yeah, so, right. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So I get it, but you're one of the people in the space that when they do their draft guide, you're more of the analytical driven, draft analyst that we have in this space. I'm someone that is very much in that space too, as well, more of an evidence driven approach. But I want to take some time to just talk about like the evolution of the ZAP model and kind of the thesis of when you started incorporating this into your analysis and started prospecting, and like kind of just how that's evolved and kind of where we are today with your model right now.
So I think I started prospecting around like the 2017 timeframe. I was a little bit later than I remember. You were already doing some stuff, and we had some conversations, whatever. I was getting into it a little bit. And the first few years, I realized that like a lot of what I was doing was very much driven by groupthink, and that's not really the way that I want to be an analyst. And so I think it was like the 2019 season where in class where like things were really funky. If you remember, like that wide receiver class in particular was just kind of like all over the place in terms of like who we thought was good, who actually ended up being good, et cetera, et cetera. And so around the 2020 timeframe, I created a model to sort of give me a process to see who the best players are in each class. And so that's iterated a lot since then. I mean, it's crazy to think that it's been 6 years basically since that timeframe, but it's iterated a lot since then, just because, number one, I've just gotten better with modeling and understanding what goes into this instead of being more, I was more of a novice before. I still probably am, but at least there's more substance into what I'm testing, how I'm testing, what I'm doing. You just kind of learn as you go. But the other thing is, and I'm sure you can definitely agree here, is that while you're analyzing stuff for collegiates, for prospects and college players going to the NFL, there's a lot to still uncover, right? Like we only have so much time every year when we're doing all this content, we're doing a bunch of stuff. Like we can't just sit down for 4 straight months and only focus on, college data and the best way to use that data within a model or the most predictive stuff. Like you can look at PFF data, which they, have out there for college players, that's probably the most comprehensive, that's accessible for most people. There's other places too, of course, but like, you can download spreadsheets and start testing R squared and start seeing, what's predictive, what's not predictive. But there's also a lot of other ways to sort of like manipulate even that data or raw data, which is what I do with the model to, see to make it more predictive. Like for instance, you could look at receiving yards per team pass attempt, which we know is a pretty predictive metric at wide receiver and honestly for running back as well. You can look at a metric like that and take it at face value and say, okay, I'm going to look at receiving yards per team pass attempt across a player's career or, in a singular season or his best season, whatever the case may be. But then you can take that a step further, okay, and say, oh, I'm going to adjust this for strength of schedule. I'm going to adjust this for age. And there's just so much you can do. So basically over the last 6 years, I've been iterating and it's come to this ZAP model, ending where I'm still, fixing it up every single year. But what it basically is doing is it's trying to project the first 3-year output for running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends as they enter the league. And it's doing that through various inputs, production metrics, stuff that we get at the combine, but not really measurables from the standpoint of athletic testing, more so just their height, weight. And then I do care about like 40s for running back and tight end. And it's just bringing that all together to try to estimate their B2S, I call it, their best 2 seasons out of their first 3 years in the NFL in PPR points per game. And so that's really what I'm aiming for. And the models are most definitely better than just draft capital itself. Because I think whenever you're modeling, it's really important to kind of be like, okay, am I better than this readily available information that anyone can access and get? Because if you're not better than draft capital, what's the freaking point? What's the point of having the model in the first place? So I measure against that, and therefore, I'm able to rely on that model, to help me find the best players in the short term of their career.
Yeah, I love that. And JJ also does a year 2 wide receiver model too, that takes the rookie year NFL input and kind of tests that against, what we can look at in the dynasty stance. Like, did a guy disappoint? What does it look like kind of moving forward? Or, did he outright, kind of smash? You brought up draft capital, and in recent years, like, we've been kind of hoodwinked a little bit, at running back and wide receiver a little bit. I remember you and I talking a couple years ago when Jahan Dotson went in the first round. It was like, oh man, like he's sliding in all these rookie drafts, and he ends up having a pretty good rookie season. You're like, oh, we got a bunch of value, and then he kind of fell off. Gets traded out of Washington. He's buried in a low volume passing game in Philadelphia. Maybe as a new lifeline, moving on to the Atlanta Falcons here in a more wide open target tree. But like guys like Jalen Polk, stand out as well. And then running back has a litany of guys. Have you adjusted anything for draft capital or found like a weaker signal in recent years, or is it still just like a primary catalyst in what's going to drive things here?
It's a primary catalyst, but what I've realized in, like I have with late round fantasy football, we have a Discord, and I get like more direct access to how people are thinking about, prospecting or just data analysis in general. And I think that what I've realized over the last handful of years is that there are some people who like strictly and very much rely on draft capital, and there's some people who almost take it in the opposite direction. Like there's very little in the middle, which is kind of where I am living at this point, right? Like, for instance, you can look at and I did this on an episode of the show about a month or 2 ago, but you could look at running back, for instance, and look at first round running back since 2011. And look at just the R squared between where these guys were drafted, and you're looking at the correlation of where these guys were drafted, and then how well they did in B2S. So those first 2 seasons out of their first 3 years. And there's a really strong correlation when you strictly look at first round running backs, which tells you that high end guys, top 16, top 10 rookie running backs, or guys who were drafted in the top 10 or top 16, they are significantly better than the guys who were drafted in the back half of the first round, which is no surprise when you just look at it anecdotally. You can look at the Clyde Edwards-Helaire's of the world who just didn't pan, David Wilson's of the world who didn't pan out as much, for whatever reason. And even like a Mark Ingram or something like that, if you want to go way, way back. But like guys who were fine or not good versus you go back to 2011, every running back that was drafted in the front half of the first round gave us at least 117 PPR point per game season, including Trent Richardson. He did that in his rookie season. It was 16.99. So basically like there is that correlation, right? But I think that the way that we interpret draft capital is way too linear. Like that's the problem, I think, in the end, is that, we see 5th overall versus 15th overall versus 25th overall. And really from 5th to 25th, there's a significant difference. But if you use that same 20 gap difference and you look at 25th overall versus 45th overall, it's really not that significant when you're looking at, let's say, wide receiver output and potential output. And so it does get signal. Like, it is the baseline of the ZAP model. The ZAP model essentially is saying, okay, here's where this guy got drafted. How should we sort of move from that mark? Like, how should we divert like, should we go to make him better, or is he worse than where he was drafted? But draft capital is that foundational piece. Where should we pivot from that draft capital piece? But in the end, Rich, like, this stuff is such an inexact science that when you are finding correlations and when you are seeing how predictive something is, the numbers are very, very small. Like, you can look at B2S for first round wide receivers dating back to 2011 and draft capital. Okay. So again, I'm looking at the R squared between draft capital of first round wide receivers. So pick 1 through 32 and their first 2 seasons in PPR points, or first best 2 seasons in their first 3 years in PPR points per game. And the R squared for first round wide receivers since 2011. Now, we have gotten better. The NFL has gotten better in recent years of like really pinpointing the better wide receivers at the front of the draft. Cause before we would get like John Ross and Tavon Austin and guys who just like had no real business being drafted that high. But the R squared is 0.08. It's like very insignificant. Like, it's not, cause we still get Jackson Smith and Jigbas and such who, fall a little bit in the back out towards the, the second half of the first round who work out. So my answer to this is very much a gray area answer where you should be using draft capital. It is important. Don't take a round 5 running back over a round 2 running back, because it's just not a logical thing to do for a lot of reasons. But I think it's actually more okay, and especially after doing the research that I did this offseason, I think it's more okay to take like early 3rd round wide receiver over a mid 2nd round wide receiver. Even if like overall you're going to see a trend that this second round 2 wide receiver looks better inherently, but there's more layers to it. There's production profiles and all these other things, all these other inputs that we're looking at. And if your process says that this guy, looks this certain way, I say go for it. Like in our rookie drafts, if it's not like you're playing ADP the way that you play in a season-long league. In our rookie drafts, we have this one shot to get this guy, especially if you're in a league, we play in a ton of leagues where it's just not active enough to be able to play the value game really, and you just got to get your dude. And so I would encourage people to go that route more frequently. Just don't be stupid about it. Like don't go after that 5th rounder, like I said, over the 2nd rounder, but recognize that like, last year, like the model really liked Luther Burden. And I it's one of those things where like in hindsight, I wish I was even more pushy and bullish, and obviously like situation and stuff helped them out. But like the model looked at this, and this is where I think modeling can really help. I know I'm ranting a little bit here, but
yeah, go for it.
This is where I think the modeling can really help, is that it's saying, okay, Luther Burden has early 2nd round draft capital. He still looked almost as good as Tedero McMillan in the prospect model. Like he still looked that good with that kind of draft capital. And trust me, draft capital is a major input. It's the biggest input in the model, but yet it's still saying this. I'm not saying that I would rank him that way, but it's at least telling you, hey, this dude could be a very, very big value in your rookie drafts. And I feel that way about some of the guys this year too.
Yeah. I mean, just from a top-down stance, I mean, we know that we're playing an opportunity-based game, really, like, and we know opportunity is going to be driven by kind of that draft capital. And, draft capital on its face value is already incorporating so many things too that like a model is going to have, right? Like we're double counting some stuff in a sense. Because just where those players are getting drafted. And that's why too, like, especially in this class, when we get into like the day 2 and day 3 picks, especially in this class, I don't want to completely tear down these guys because they're going there for a reason to begin with. Like,
right.
It's like, all right, so it's okay. I think when you do like some of these guys that maybe have some red flags, it's okay to say like, all right, we can operate with a more glass half full approach because like, it's just not as risky, right? Like, it's like, hey, the hit rate here, especially in this class, is going to be really low. You might as well swing on this running back that profiles, at least he's big and fast and can catch, right? Like, and hopefully it works out. So we'll talk. And then the one last thing I do want to touch on too, before we get into some of the player stuff and get some of things going, is, player age has been like a big thing the last couple of years because it's been kind of warped, right? Like we had the COVID extension through eligibility, a lot of players, this is the last year that we have that. And then the NIL stuff, which we kind of don't know because it overlapped the boon with the COVID years, the extra years. So one thing we know, at least NIL, like guys will move around. Also, we saw some small school guys get offered to go to big schools this year and like Power Fours, and they stayed, and it probably helped them. So I don't know, like if there might be a cat and mouse game going on with this too as well. Like Skylar Bell stands out, right? Like he turned down a little under $1 million to go to Michigan, and like he would have caught 40 passes this year at Michigan. Right. Like with Underwood, like stays at UConn, stacks a huge target share with basically a 27-year-old quarterback, and stacks stats and gets a lot of buzz. Guys like Bryce Lance and Ted Hurst had offers too and stayed too. So just how are you calibrating for age through this period? Or are you just kind of taking like a wait and see it approach when we come out of this? Or have you made any adjustments for age over these last couple of years?
Yeah. So, I mean, look, to me, part of it is a little bit overblown in terms of the application, right? So if we're dynasty managers and our whole goal here is to just find who the best players are going to be in fantasy football, how often are we really comparing one class to a class that happened before them? Are we saying, should I trade this 106 for, some player that happened that came out the previous year? Sure. But we have a full year of NFL data on players like Luther Burden, Emeka Egbuka, Tedero McMillan, etc. That stuff is going to get a lot more weight anyway than how they were viewed as prospects coming out. That stuff is way more important. And so when I say the application piece is really important, is that, like for instance, this year I changed in the ZAP model, I changed the scaling of how the ZAP model displays scores, because before I was doing it on a percentile basis. And now, but what I realized with that is very linear, right? But that doesn't really show the gaps between the best players to the next group, et cetera, properly. So I did it more in more of like a logarithmic way to show that like, oh no, this guy is like elite. And then there's a gap until this next dude. And one of the pieces of feedback that I've been getting so frequently is, well, I want to compare this class to classes before, but in the end, that's just for curiosity and content, right? Like that's just to say, like, I want to know how good Emeka Egbuka is versus Carnell Tate, which I can give you that answer. But realistically, you're not faced with the decision of looking at Emeka Egbuka as a prospect versus Carnell Tate as a prospect. You're looking at Emeka Egbuka as a prospect and year one player in the NFL versus Carnell Tate as a prospect. And so for me, it's all relative to how that class looks entering the NFL. And so if you're measuring and looking at it against each other, which is how we're really measuring these rookies in general, then that's important. But then on top of that, when it comes to the age discussion, the best players are still declaring early, and the best players are still giving us the really good age-adjusted production. Like very rarely are, like Bryce Lance is a great example. I have a hard time with Lance, not to say that he can't pan out because he's a size speed freak, but he did nothing. He had one reception his first 3 years of college. He didn't do anything until that fourth season, and he's older, et cetera, et cetera. You can look in history and see that kind of profile is one that has a lot of volatility and quite frankly, doesn't pan out at a very high rate. Not to say that we're expecting it, Bryce Lance to pan out, but it's one of those situations where like, that is still an apples to apples comparison. You can still look at age adjusted production because all these guys are still having a freshman, sophomore, junior season that you can look at how they perform in that instance. I think the one place where it might be a little bit different is that if players are indeed staying longer, and if that's the thesis, which I think is fair, especially you and I had the conversation about the COVID season where like, I still think I think next year we might see a younger group than the last couple of years because
I think so too
of these guys that have like lingered around. But regardless, like I think that we're probably going to see like moving forward, given the state of college football and college sports, we're going to see older players than what we saw in 2016 and 2017, right? Like as a whole. And so you could argue that their production is going to be a little bit more difficult to really come to be if they're competing with older, more experienced players who are staying in college. So I get that argument. I just don't think that argument is going to be so insane from a statistical standpoint that it's going to make these players who all of a sudden are really good have bad age adjusted production. Like I don't think it's enough for us to say age adjusted production isn't that important anymore when, in fact, you could argue it becomes even more important because if you get guys who did have crazy good age adjusted production, that's just telling you that these guys are very, very special. So it's all relative to me. Like I think it's an important conversation to have. And I think it's important for everyone to recognize that with modeling that like stuff is changing all the time. The NFL is changing all the time. But with this, I try to like think about the application piece and be like, okay, all of these guys are measured against the exact same thing right now. Coming out, it's the same year, it's the same exact circumstances. So I can still decipher which guy I think is better analytically than another.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in lockstep with you too. I think that we're going to skew back younger post COVID, just because like NIL is not going to offer extra eligibility like COVID did. But we are, I think, going to, especially at the running back position, I think, and quarterback position, we're going to start see guys that are just that benefit from just being older prospects, right? Like a Mike Washington this year, right? Like a guy that kind of bounced around a couple schools, gets a shot to be a lead back and has his best statistical season, then, obviously ends up testing well as a cherry on top. But I think we're going to see a lot of that happen at the running back position. I think that's where a lot of the age production stuff is going to come into play for running backs. And obviously, opportunity is going to matter for those guys. You can be a bad running back. The great thing about running back for fantasy football is, like, I've always used the movie star, kind of analogy. Is like, you don't have to be a great actor to be a movie star. It's the same thing for like be running back. Like, you don't have to be a great running back to be a good fantasy football running back.
Yeah.
So that helps them. Wide receiver is probably going to be a little more fluid, but like these early guys that are wide receiver, especially with the way the money is poured into the position, those guys are going to declare. Like these guys are like, Jeremiah Smith isn't coming back for his senior year.
Right.
The second he can go pro.
Although, I mean, look, we are seeing way fewer early declares, though, to be fair. But the guys who are declaring are freaking good. Like, they're very good.
Yeah, and in this year too is kind of an interesting angle too, because we have a couple of early declares for guys that maybe weren't going to come out. Like, Omar Cooper is a guy who was looking like he was going to come back to school, and I think just got a really positive report from the NFL, and obviously the steam that has followed that. He's now like minus 1,200 to go in the first round, and like in a previous year, like objectively, like this is a player that was like a firm day 2 player on paper. But I think he just, the intersection of timing of that postseason run, what he brings to an NFL offense, and then paired with this draft class, he was like, oh, I've got to declare. So there's gonna be all those, like you said, it is gonna be nuanced, but I definitely don't want to lose sight and say like this age adjusted production doesn't matter. I still think it's a pretty good North Star, not just from a modeling perspective, but from understanding like, yeah, this guy's a legit talent because he was 18 years old at the school and came in and performed. So
the thing is though too, is that like with running backs or whatever position, like I think you're totally right that running back would be the position that this probably impacts more, just because good wide receivers are going to make way more money than they would, playing in college still. But with running, you can still age adjust even when they're older. Like, if they're 23 years old, your expectation just becomes higher, right? Like, just think of it that way, is that like they should be dominating when they're in that position, and and that's how you sort of adjust for age even when they're older. It's not only the fact that like they had, if they didn't produce when they were freshmen and sophomores, it's all over. No, you can still say, okay, they're a 4, maybe in year 4 and then year 5, if they stuck around, they got some production, and that production was really, really, really good. If like Mike Washington would have gone absolutely nuclear instead of some of the production that he had, then, you could make a stronger argument. Not to say that he's good or bad. It's just that, like, imagine he just went absolutely ballistic, the last year and a half or something of his collegiate career, instead of just having like decent production, then we would view him differently. You can still adjust even when they're older.
Yeah, and the other thing too, I think we're going to see is something in the case of like a Nicholas Singleton, where he stays kind of when he could have probably went pro, but it was more of a logjam last year. But he would have been totally regarded if he comes out last year in a different light than that senior year that he just had. So like, but we do have that age adjusted production where you're like, man, like this dude was young and had 3 years of production, versus a lot of these guys in this class. Like Singleton has fallen like below draft favor from a number of guys that he was just outright better than at a younger age for 3 years at a power program. Right. And it's just like, I have a hard time, like him, especially like moving him below guys because of that age production, like a Mike Washington, right? It's like, it's almost a similar profile, like as you guys. It's like, well, this guy did it at age 3 as a high recruit for 3 years at, age 19 and 20 and 21, while one guy was, 23 on his
bouncing around.
Bouncing around. So it's like all these things kind of come into play. Like you said, it is more nuanced, but definitely something to keep on. I think it's interesting and it's fun to talk about. Let's talk about one of those guys. We'll start off here at the wide receiver because it's kind of like the one spot that is a little more top heavy in fantasy drafts here. Well, we will talk about some running backs, but one of those players that has really good age adjusted production, didn't have as great of a final season because he played hurt and missed some time, is Jordyn Tyson. Jordyn Tyson, if you just go you're right up on the Zap model. And in my model, he also is the highest scoring wide receiver too as well. So how do you handle a guy like Jordyn Tyson, who isn't going to be it's pretty thin odds he's going to be the first wide receiver taken, right?
Probably,
in April. Like I think there's far enough fire to the smoke of Carnell Tate being wide receiver one. So how do you handle a guy like Tyson where like he's in almost like a Luther Burden last year? Like you knew Burden wasn't gonna be the first wide receiver. You said you almost wish you would have been more bullish on him and followed the model more. So how do you handle a guy like Tyson who could theoretically be the wide receiver 3, maybe the wide receiver 4 in this class in terms of draft capital? If he ends up being like pick 20. Talk a little bit just to him about his profile and how you're thinking about handling him not being the first wide receiver taken.
So I'll say this, there's a very real, because I got this question for a mailbag episode a couple weeks ago, and someone was like, how far would Jordyn Tyson have to fall for him to not be the wide receiver 1 in the Zap model? And it's a really good question. And the answer might shock you because it's like early second round capital. Like his production profile, age adjusted production profile, in my opinion, for the stuff that the Zap model is looking at, is the best in the class. I don't think it's that close. I think there's some advanced metrics that you could be swayed towards, like a Mekhi Lemon, and I could understand that. Carnell Tate's a little bit iffier, but obviously he has the uniform and the competition at Ohio State that he got, backing him. But with Jordyn Tyson, so breakout score, so it's not breakout age. I really wish I would have named this differently because people often think that I'm talking about breakout age and I'm not. Breakout age is fine, but I just had issues with it because it's really binary in nature and the way that it's calculated and stuff. Like it can help you get to the right direction for sure, but you can have a 19% dominator rating versus one who has a 1% dominator rating. You guys look the exact same as someone who gets a 20%, dominator rating, depending on how you're measuring breakout age. But with breakout score, what I'm using is age and program adjusted receiving yards per team pass attempt. So it just looks at a player's receiving yards per team pass attempt every year that he played college football, and it's adjusting that for age, how old they were when they did that, and then program strength. So Jordyn Tyson, yes, he's not an early declare, which is a little bit of a flag, but he was young coming out of high school, and he immediately goes to Colorado 9 games before he hurts his knee. 9 games, he still leads the team in receiving, despite missing games his freshman season. Doesn't play year 2 because of that knee injury. Comes back, and to me, that third year for Jordyn Tyson, it reminds me of the sophomore year of Luther Burden that we had last year, where it was like analytically the best single season that you could find in that class when you adjust for age and et cetera. And so that gave him, so essentially he's, with the way breakout score works, it's like stacking. So like he gets that really early breakout in receiving yards per team pass attempt because he did stuff his freshman year, but then he gave us the peak as well, which is what's different with someone like KC Concepcion, who, was able to get us some production right away, which is great. I like Concepcion, but it's different because he never gave us that peak season the way that Jordyn Tyson did. And the way that I've looked at things historically is that the peak season, because a lot of people will look at Tyson and be like, oh, well, what happened last year? Well, a couple of things happened. Like, yes, his production fell off, but he also had the hammy that didn't help him from a production standpoint and efficiency standpoint. But regardless of all of that, if you look at players historically who kind of had that bell curve where like their peak happened maybe sophomore, junior season, if they're a 4-year guy, junior season, maybe 3-year guy, sophomore season, there's a lot of guys who have hit in a big way who had a similar trajectory, like whether it's Juju had that, Luther Burden had that, Jackson Smith and Jigba had that. So you have these players who, yes, they didn't just like linearly Elijah Surratt themselves, just getting better and better. Yeah, right. And so what I found though is that the peak is what's more important. And so that's what breakout score is really capturing, is that peak / if it happened early. His breakout score is in the 99th percentile. And very rarely do we get like massive. The only guy that he comps to that scares me that it could go in that direction is like a Corey Davis, where like, but again, with Davis, like it was a little bit different of a profile from the standpoint of smaller program, competition was a little bit more difficult to adjust for and comprehend. Whereas, I mean, Arizona State was good and they faced some tough competition, overall, that it doesn't scare me quite as much as something like that. And you just look down the line at some of the advanced metrics that aren't in the Zap model. So, his career yards per route runs in the 89th percentile among the guys in the Zap model database. First downs per route run, 93rd percentile. Like everything looks good until you get, you can nitpick and say his missed tackles forced and yak profile is not the strongest.
Right.
Got a little bit of that Tyler Lockett in him, just falls over and he's not pushing himself as much. And that I think is combined with the injury stuff is where we're getting a lot of the toughness discussion that's coming out about him not being tough or what have you. I have a hard time with that because he had that hamstring injury and he just played through it. I don't know. I don't want to judge a dude just by a broken collarbone or something like that. So to me, I'm in on Tyson as wide receiver 1. I'm actually kind of shocked because if you look at like keep trade cut, there's a significant gap in overall, not rookie rankings, because rookie rankings, he's the wide receiver 3. But if you look at the overall rankings, it's like you have Tate and Lemon next to each other. And then there's actually like a 7 or 8 wide receiver gap till you get Jordyn Tyson. It's shocking to me, man. Like, not to say that I can't understand why someone likes Tate or Lemon more, but I'm just surprised the consensus in an analytically driven community, the way the fantasy community is off of Tyson the way they are. Because I think that this profile on paper looks very, very good. And the injury stuff is just not enough for me to say, hey, no, I'm going to put this dude at wide receiver 4 in this class, even wide receiver 3, in my opinion, just because I don't know. It's hard to quantify that. It's hard to know what the injury stuff really means in the end. And not only that, he came back from the most devastating one, which was the knee injury, and had the best season of any wide receiver in this class. So that's where I'm at with Jordyn Tyson. I think he's a very, very good prospect. And the model absolutely loves him. I think that some of the off the field, like the injury stuff or what his draft capital might say, it might force me to put him in the same tier as the other 2 wide receivers, but he'll probably be almost definitely be my wide receiver 1 post draft.
Yeah, I love it. He shows up great on mine. I ended up having him at wide receiver 2. For the reason is I think he's a little bit of like a master of none quality to him, and he reminds me a lot of a player that I absolutely loved coming out, Rashad Bateman. Rashad Bateman was a player at Minnesota like this. So the one leg up that Tyson has, I think, on these top guys is that he does have the largest sample of playing all 3 wide receiver positions. Yeah. Whereas the other 2 guys, we kind of have to project, Ken Lemon, with Lemon's asked to win out a slot at a higher degree, what are we going to get it? And if we put more on Tate's place where he's not just in this downfield role, how does he adjust? And I think those guys are going to be fine in those if they're asked to do those things. But Tyson actually has proof on the football field of winning at all 3 positions. But he kind of also doesn't have like a home, whereas at least I know like Tate and Lemon's floor is kind of what we have already seen demonstrated.
That's
like
fair.
At worst, Lemon is going to be a Josh Downs type player, right?
Yeah,
like
Jaden Reed or something like that. Yeah.
And Tate, like at his worst, is like an Alec Pierce type downfield player, and you hope, you obviously want there to be more, but we know that those are the roles he could fit. Tyson, I think, is going to be a little bit team to team dependent on what position he's actually going to play that first year. And then, obviously I think he's a little bit more needy in terms of on field when you watch him for he needs to be paired with the right quarterback. I can't wait to pick Harmon's brain about this next week. So I suppose he tends to he's got really high football IQ in my opinion, and understands leverage and kind of mid play, where to run routes. And it's why he scores really high on Harmon's angle from a zone coverage beater. He's a really high zone success rate. But his production actually is weaker against zone coverage because you need a quarterback to see things the same way you're seeing things.
Right.
And that's why there's kind of a disconnect statistically, because he will take an out route and maybe run it 14 yards when it was supposed to be 12 yards. And a quarterback like Josh Allen talked about this. He's like, I don't care because I see what you're doing. I read leverage, but if he plays a timing offense or a quarterback that needs things to be in structure, it could end up hurting him. The injury stuff I don't care about. I don't want to be flippant about it. It's just we've done this before. You're injury prone to, you're not. And he doesn't have a history of chronic injuries. And maybe this hamstring is one that develops, but we don't have any proof of this being something that is going on,
or Watson or something.
Yeah. And listen, we've done it. Mike Evans has been on the injury report, the hamstring injury, I feel for 10 straight years.
We love Mike Evans. We draft and use Mike Evans. So
yeah. So I mean, I'm not really looking at this his injury history and really docking him for it. I do think Lemon is entering the NFL at a time where just players like Lemon, I think, are just he's entering the NFL like the perfect time.
I
Like
agree with that.
what he brings to the table. So I think just a little bit from like a floor perspective and maybe some of the draft capital stuff. But what's interesting is when you look at some of the, we talk about draft capital, is it could be a blessing in disguise for Tyson, even if he slides a little bit, because, you know, the front half of the draft, like these teams that have full wide receiver 1 openings are basically, it's really just Tennessee and Miami. And then the rest, even the teams that have been linked to wide receivers and can take some of these guys, have young wide receiver 1s on the roster already. Like the Giants have Neighbors, the Jets have Garrett Wilson. I'm missing another one. Oh, the Ravens have Zay Flowers, right? Like these are all guys that if these players land on a roster with those guys, like they're gonna have a hard time leapfrogging those guys in terms of target share. So it's gonna be interesting to kind of see how that plays out in terms of where these guys are picked. So Tyson, though, but if he ends up the wide receiver 2 on, say, like the Bills or the 49ers, like, and he might not even be the wide receiver. He would have for Mike Evans, but like in year 2, he could easily be like the leader in targets on that team. But it could be a blessing in disguise, basically, with me saying if he slides and ends up in a different spot. One of the guys that we know of a really good idea that's going to be picked first, we talked about, is Carnell Tate. And ironically, like if he goes to one of those spots, he probably ends up playing the same role he played in college. But talk to me a little bit how you handle a guy like Tate that obviously is in this long run of like Ohio State putting out all these dominant dudes. But even on the spectrum of Ohio State wide receivers, he's a very light analytical profile, like one of the lightest of the guys. Probably Terry McLaurin is the closest one to him in terms of analytical profile. And Terry McLaurin was a round 3 pick. Like not taken universally as a top 10 pick. When I watch Tate, I see him, I'm excited because I'm like, oh, every offense needs a guy like Tate, like this guy that can win vertically, win one-on-one, and win on the boundary. No matter what scheme you run, you need that type of player. But how do you handle him like when he's going to be projected to be the wide receiver 1 versus a guy that's like a lighter, probably prospect score in terms of analytical end?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is a situation that I don't like to use this like reasoning very frequently because I think there's such a tie to real NFL and fantasy, production in general. But I do think that he could end up being a better real life NFL player than fantasy asset. Where Mekhi Lemon, if you were to just compare the two, Mekhi Lemon, like you said, can fit in. If he finds the right landing spot, Mekhi Lemon, it can be another, and I know it's a cheap thing to say, but it could be another Amon-Ra St. Brown type situation, right? Where
like he's a Ram.
Yeah, right. Like just can play inside out and just gobble up targets and just be a PPR merchant, and it's fine. And we take it. And, say what you want about Amon-Ra St. Brown, but like I think that a landing spot can also help a player just naturally develop quicker and become the thing that he's supposed to be in the NFL faster if that spot is ideal. And I think with Amon-Ra St. Brown, remember, he didn't do that much the first half of his rookie season. And then that second half is when he really, really blew up because injuries happened and things just kind of aligned the right way for him. And if something like that happens for Mekhi Lemon, like he's the type of player that can take advantage of that. And that's what's important. Like when you have the vessel to be able to do that thing, that thing can then actually do what we want in fantasy football. With Carnell Tate, I don't know, man. Like I agree with you that if you look at previous Ohio State wide receivers, let's just go back to like the Olave Wilson class. Olave Wilson, Marvin Harrison Jr., Emeka Egbuka. Carnell Tate has a good breakout score. It's 87th percentile. It's not that bad because again, I'm adjusting for age and program strength, so the program strength stuff is getting a decent amount of boost for him. But it was the worst one of those guys. And breakout score, if you look at top 100 wide receivers historically, it correlates and it predicts first 3 year output just as well as draft capital does, just straight up. So breakout score matters, and his breakout score is fine. It's not something that I'm going to flag as a bad thing at all. It's really not bad at all. But it is worse than what the other wide receivers did. And like someone like Emeka Egbuka, who I liked last year, he had like rushing production too to his profile. Like he had more of that versatility which is why he was so frequently, even in my model, but even by film folks, comped to Robert Woods, so often because it was that inside out, can get the end arounds and do stuff on the ground and be more of that weapon as opposed to just more of a traditional perimeter wide receiver, which is what I think we get with Carnell Tate, who can stretch the field vertically and do more of that stuff. And then on top of that, he was never a target getter at Ohio State. Like his best season in target share was 22%, which is not just a below average number in general. It's a below average number in this class. And so I'm a little bit concerned about what and how that translates, because a lot of that stuff then translates to his per game numbers not really lining up to what you typically see from a first round pick.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of crazy. Like to me, I can understand him as a first round pick, but it is kind of shocking that he could easily go top 6. Like he goes 6 to Cleveland, right? He's being mocked to Cleveland so frequently. And you look at other players who have come out in the last 5-10 years that have gone in the top 10, and the vast majority of them, if not all of them, have better analytical profiles, in my opinion, than Carnell Tate. He's not like, when I say that, people are going to think that I don't think he's a bad prospect. It's just the fact that right. I think the guy like Drake London, even a T-Mac last year, like those players just look better analytically than what Tate looks like.
Yeah, he's very tricky in that regard. Didn't have a lot of, per game production, a lot of spike, like you said, of earning targets. Even the other guys would have like a random game, right? Where it's like, oh, like you have this like 12 target, like Buka game, or like, so like we don't really have any of those on Tate's profile. Like, it's all just stuff that's chunk yardage. And, granted, that's the route tree that he was kind of given. But I mean, even 14 games against ranked opponents, 37 yards per game. 2.9 receptions per game. I know you're not like you're very anti threshold guy, but like, I did pull just like him, because he averaged only 3.1 catches per game in college.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And I pulled like a list, and I gave like a lot of buffer. I didn't want to make like I didn't want to include everyone, but I wanted to like give
thresholds are great, Reeves, is when you give it that buffer. It's more so
so like I pulled every wide receiver that was drafted in the first round that had 4 or fewer catches for their career.
He's well below that. He's at 75% of that.
Yeah, so I took it to 4. We have 34 players since 2000. Only 29% gave us one wide receiver 1 scoring season. 47% failed to give us any year as a wide receiver 3 or better. So almost half. 58% failed to give us a wide receiver 2 or better season so far. Like, and the major hits from that group are guys like Demaryius Thomas and Odell Beckham, guys who had just like this extreme level of dynamic ability with the football in their hands. And I'm not saying Tate can't be a guy that breaks tackles or gets like targets near the line of scrimmage just because he did it at Ohio State. We just don't have any proof of it.
Yeah.
It takes more of a leap of faith. Probably the biggest hit of guy that he stands for from an analytical stance for me is Roddy White. And, a lot of people probably like, who's Roddy White? We're old, but mid 2000s. And Roddy White turned into like a full field wide receiver and had a really solid career. That'd be like the pie in the sky outcome where you got 7 wide receiver 3+ seasons, but pretty low hit rate on a lot of these guys. It's funny too when you pull that list and you see how many like speed guys and just like how the NFL is like they overvalue the big plays though, because Tate's not necessarily like a speed guy like you would consider like a Henry Ruggs or like a Troy Williamson, guys on this list, Philip Dorsett, John Ross, right? But he's I think getting a little bit maybe over-indexed because the plays he makes are just huge plays. And I think his floor is still probably that, but it's interesting enough is that he actually could land in one of those spots. Like if he's next to a Garrett Wilson or Malik Neighbors or Chris Olave, is he not just probably doing the same thing? Like
no, that's the thing that scares me. Like I have a teammate score in the wide receiver model, so the problem with it's very imperfect. It gets signal, but I tell people all the time it's not it's a really hard thing to solve, this teammate score, because Jeremiah Smith is a great example where he's an underclassman. I don't know objectively how good he is. Like I do know how good he is, but objectively, I don't know how good he is because I can look at previous classes that were already drafted and say, okay, Emeka Egbuka had, top whatever draft capital. And so he was able to we can reference that and say, okay, he played with a wide receiver who had first round draft capital and therefore he gets a little bit of a boost. I could say that Jeremiah Smith is going to be a top 5 guy next year, which he probably will be. But you have to do that then for every single player. It just becomes a really difficult thing to project. And so there is a teammate score, and he probably should get a little bit of a boost and a little bit of a leeway for having played with him. But to your point, there's going to be like the potential for a stud that he's going to play alongside at the NFL level, which goes to what I was saying before, where in those scenarios, great for a real NFL team, great for the progress of that offense, but it's really scary from a fantasy perspective when you pair him with a real target hog who is obviously going to just dominate, those looks and dominate in fantasy football then.
Yeah, and we also don't know some of these guys that are going to turn out to in the future look to be like great teammates, right? Like you don't always know, like, oh, this dude played with this sophomore, like KC Concepcion played with Mario Craver. Like we did, no one's talking about Mario Craver in the same breath as Jeremiah Smith, but come 2 years from now or a year from now, he could be regarded as a first round pick. And then his production even looks, better stacked against that. And there's some other guys in this class too. You look at you just draft capital. They don't always work out in the pros. Like Jeremy Bernard's a guy that's bounced around and been like with a bunch of highly drafted NFL teammates, Keon Coleman and Jaden Reed at Michigan State, all the Washington dudes, including Dawson, the Washington. So it is tougher to claim. It's just one of these things that just in college football, it's hard to just count for like all the variables at once. But I know what type of player he is, and obviously Ohio State is earned like everyone kind of a hall pass a little bit. Let's move on to like that secondary group here. This year there seems to be like a top 6 wide receivers, like 2 tiers of 3 basically. Some people have Concepcion in like that blurred line as a tier 1, tier 2 guy, but then you have Denzel Washington and Omar Cooper, and we don't really have anyone else kind of sniffing round 1 draft capital this year. Maybe we'll have a surprise when we, next week. But how close are you considering that grouping of next 3 guys? Also, let me know if you have someone else in there other than those 3 guys, from a modeling perspective, and how you're handling that secondary tier.
So I think Concepcion is kind of in his own tier next on that list. A lot of it, again, he didn't have, I said it earlier, he didn't have that like spike season that we really ideally want these guys to get, but he produced right away at NC State, and then he transfers last year, and last year his numbers got better. They were strong. The other thing too is that he played a lot in the slot at NC State, and then he moved to the outside a lot more last year, and his yards per out run rate was great last year. He actually ended his collegiate career. This goes back to Mekhi Lemon too, which is why I'm not afraid at all about the slot stuff with him, is that he had a better out wide yards per out run rate than slot yards per out run rate. Mekhi Lemon had the best out wide yards per out run rate in this class, according to PFF data. So, same thing, small sample sizes and such, but, Concepcion, I think has the ability to play both inside out, and again, really fit what today's game kind of, allows him to do, which is be that target hog. He has some of that versatility and rushing production to his game as well. He would like line up in the backfield and like be a running back at times. And so, which at his size, the other good thing is that he weighed more than I think a lot of people expected at the combine, where he was 196. I think a lot of people thought he was maybe like 6 or 7 pounds lighter than that. So I think it all comes together. It's like a pretty solid overall, like a pretty good yak profile, pretty good avoided tackles profile. Both those things typically do translate to the next level when it comes to the data that we look at. Overall, it's hard to really poke holes and like say that he's horrific. The one thing I'd say is that, there's a lot of talk about, yards per route run against zone and against man. The only thing I'll say about that, I do think there's some validity to it, especially because we know how much zone teams are playing. But the one thing I'll say to that is when you start to take something like yards per route run and you're essentially cutting it, into 2 different subsets, all you're getting a lot more noise too, right? So with when it comes to zone versus man, these college wide receivers are going to play more against zone than they are against man. And so you're getting a smaller sample size of man than you are zone in general, which means your smaller sample size brings a lot more volatility and variance. And when there's more volatility and variance, that means that your predictiveness or correlation is going to be weaker, right? So I do think that zone matters more than likely, but I don't want to go crazy with that analysis only because, and just like ignore yards per out run as a whole and only focus on zone, because yards per out run allows you to get the bigger picture still in a larger sample size for each of these guys. And so, yes, there is a little bit of that with Concepcion. Like his career yards per out run is 2.03. It's a 49th percentile number. That's not very strong, especially for a first round wide receiver. But it goes back to like some of the early declare stuff too. And I've talked about this a lot where, I think historically we've all thought of early declare status as, oh, he's declaring early. That means he's talented. And if he's talented, he's going to be good in fantasy football. But I think that early declare status is necessary because the guy didn't play a 4th or 5th or collegiate season. And so his numbers are naturally going to be suppressed a little bit. Like if KC Concepcion goes back to school in 2026. You don't think he's going to dominate in yards per route run or be a lot better in yards per route run? He's gotten better. He was better last year. So why wouldn't we expect that to get, like, we've seen that natural trajectory for most wide receivers. So I don't think that we should just assume that, like, this is what his career yards per route run looks like. And then you look at, again, Bryce Lance. Feels like I'm just crapping on him today, but you look at Bryce Lance, he's only playing his 4th and 5th collegiate season, and that's where almost all of his routes run came against weaker competition. Yeah, his yards per route run rates are going to look better than KC Concepcion, which is why we go back to adjusting for age, adjusting for program, all that kind of stuff. So there is somewhat of a flag with some of those per route run numbers with Concepcion, but I'm not overly, like, concerned about that. I think he's a pretty good prospect overall.
Yeah, and KC Concepcion is one of those guys too that has, like, a pretty clear rationale of why his yards per out run maybe don't look as great as some other guys, because yards per out run, not only is it a volume stat, but it's also tied to kind of quarterback efficiency as well.
100%.
We did this 2 years ago with the Chicago Bears wide receivers, where they all had terrible yards per out run that first year at Caleb, because they ran so many routes where they either had uncatchable targets or there weren't even targets on the play because there's a scramble or a tip pass or something like that. Like, I remember coming into last year, I charted, like, I pulled, like, the last 10 years, and, like, DJ Moore had run, like, he had like 150 routes that were just didn't even have, like, a target available on the play. It was, like, unheard of. It's like, you can't have a good yards per out run if there's no yards available on the play. And Concepcion was 3rd in this class, in rate of off target throws as well. And he had some self-induced mistakes as well too, in terms of drops, but you're getting a high rate of uncatchable targets too that are impacting and suppressing some of that yards per out run too. That second year at NC State was a disaster. They brought in Grayson McCall. He had, like, 3 concussions the first 2 weeks. And they go to a backup quarterback, and the whole offense falls apart. It's just things you have to look under the hood and kind of look at. Like you said, nothing's extreme, like, power law. We're going to take one sampling of analytics and say, like, this is why a guy's good, like a yards per out run. We're trying to apply context to it. Concepcion looks pretty close to me, like a Burden, but, like, just doesn't have that spike year, right?
Exactly.
Like, just doesn't have that. Like, Burden had that sophomore year, like you said in his profile. We don't have that Concepcion. One guy that has kind of like a highly efficient year is Omar Cooper. But again, like we kind of alluded to, like, this is a guy, like, when you look at him on paper, is another one of these guys like Carnell Tate, where you're just like, okay. Like, you're not even, like, down on the player. It's just he doesn't look like players that are typically drafted in the area where he's projected to go. So where are you at with Omar Cooper?
Yeah, he doesn't look as bad as I kind of expected, just based on, like, if you're box score scouting. Because, like, my process for, like, writing up the profiles and stuff is that I always just kind of, like, look at the profile as a whole just to see kind of, like, where they played, because I don't know all these guys. I'm so focused on the NFL during the season and stuff. And then I start digging in analytically, and I'll have on my other monitor, like, them playing, so I can at least talk reasonably about them, so that I'm not just going in blind and I have no idea what these guys even look like. With Omar Cooper, a lot of his market share numbers were not as bad as I expected based on some of the box score stuff that I looked at. But, like, his age adjusted production isn't out of control. He didn't do anything his first year. His breakout score is 55th percentile, versus Concepcion being more in, like, 75th percentile. But his yards per route run is strong, and his first down per route run is strong. And he, again, is one of those players where I think teams are going to, like, I'm not shocked that this is the archetype of player that teams are seemingly falling in love with, right? That is rising his projected draft capital, where he's really good after the catch. Like, he's very fun to watch and to like, he's got that Debo in him, not to go to the default comp that we all use for guys who can be bulldozers. He's 20 pounds lighter than Debo, but actually a lot of their advanced production metrics, aside from where they lined up, but a lot of their advanced production metrics do look alike, like their yards per out run or their yak profiles, even some of their ADOT stuff. Like, there is some of that to his game. His initial comp, though, his top comp for the Zap model was Rashee Rice. And I think that with Cooper, if he finds, Rashee Rice is obviously, I think he's been better in the NFL than I ever expected him to be as a prospect. But as a prospect, he also did stuff that he's doing in the NFL that he didn't do as a prospect, in terms of, like, alignment and how they just deployed him in SMU and such. With Omar Cooper, I do think that in the right environment, he could be a target hog. It's just a hard thing to project / assume for any player when there are so many good wide receivers across the league right now. And I think that's part of the reason. Like we've had so many discussions about, the death of the wide receiver too, that episode that I did, or the influx and heavy personnel that we're seeing in the NFL. That's certainly impacting how wide receivers are targeted. But what's also, I think, impacting it is the spread in which they're being targeted, because there's a lot of talented wide receivers in the league. And so it makes it harder for a guy who would be dependent on high target shares to find a spot that would allow him to, and this is kind of the Mekhi Lemon problem to a degree, like to let him be that dude, right? But overall, not like a terrible profile. This is typically probably like an early second round profile, though, in my opinion. Like that's not what I try to project with the Zap model, but when you look at things, his breakout score and such, it's more of a early day 2 type profile than, it's not unlike a Debo situation. But overall, I don't dislike him. I mean, like I said, his avoided tackles per reception is crazy. Like he's very, very good with the ball in his hands. And I think that can fit well in what teams are doing today. And that's why we'll probably see a slightly inflated draft cost for him.
Yeah, I think we're going to see the 6 receivers we kind of talked about be in kind of like the top 8 to 9 rookie picks, depending if you're in super flex or tight end premium. But then there's a pretty sizable fall off in terms of, where we're talking about like guys are projected. Like I said, we don't even have like a 7th guy that's been like kind of floated as like this guy could sneak into round 1, right? Like it's been kind of a clear cutoff with these top 6. But if you're picking, 109, 110, 111, 112, and, you're looking at this running back class, you're looking at this wide receiver class, how are you handling that next tier of guys that are projected in terms of capital? And using your picks on those guys, guys like Jeremy Bernard, Chris Bell, Bryce Lance, Ted Hurst, like that group of guys. Like, what are you doing if you have picks in that area?
I am very rarely do I let landing spot and such like dictate a lot of this, but I think you kind of have to a degree, because a lot of these guys have very average, slightly above average profiles. Like Chris Bell is not a horrible prospect, but there's a lot of, there's not like there was a lot of easier stuff for him too. And that, like, this is not, to me, like when he gets comped to like AJ Brown, I can't do it. Like AJ Brown was like an elite, analytically elite prospect coming out. We have like we have the size with Chris Bell, right? Like we have the same archetype from that perspective, but there's some issues to his game, but you can do that with literally any of these next guys. Jeremy Bernard feels like more of a floor than ceiling player, more of like a, wide receiver 3 type on a team, like a Mohamed Sanu or something like that. Chris Brazzell, I'm going to jersey scout a little bit. It's a little bit scary of what we've seen, out of Tennessee and such. And he has, even his analytical profile isn't flawless. Zachariah Branch, I can't touch. It's a profile that we see, the Malachi Corleys of the world, the Lynn Bowdens there's just guys who, Anthony Schwartz, Kadarius Toney. It's a profile that just busts at a really high rate. Malachi Fields had a really bad age adjusted production profile. So to me, I like Elijah Surratt. I think the NFL just doesn't. I think that he's a lack of separation. It's funny.
He's probably the inverse of everything we talked about. He actually has a pretty good analytical profile, and then
But I think, but it's funny because his two top comps in the Zap model were Pat Bryant and Michael Thomas, and I'm like, all right, I guess Denver should be looking at, but they obviously don't need to. But it just points to he might end up being more big slot than a true perimeter guy at the next level. And so that's there's just question marks with all of these guys. So it comes down to the fact that, like, I think the other thing that we have to keep in mind, I say this all the time with like my pre-draft rankings, is I always have running backs ranked lower in my pre-draft rankings than my post-draft rankings, because I don't want to take a chance on a running back that really does fall in the draft when he doesn't get day 2 draft capital, even if I like that guy, and rank him ahead of, some guys who are like early second round draft capital wide receivers. Like, right. If I knew that a guy was drafted in round 3 at running back versus a second round wideout where I think he has a questionable profile, it's a lot easier for me to say, yeah, I'll take the running back. I can do that at times. It's not a big deal. But if they're a 5th round running back, I love Emmett Johnson, right? I think Emmett Johnson is a really intriguing prospect where this archetype that we see from Johnson, we've seen actually hit, even though he doesn't have crazy athleticism. And I like him a lot. But if he goes in round 5, which is very possible, I'm not going to draft him over a second round wide receiver. It's going to be very difficult for me to go that direction, just knowing the massive difference in hit rate there. And what we're going to see is the second and early third into the third round wide receivers. There's so many of them, the potential for them, that we're going to see some of them hit. Like one or two, like Chris Bell might hit, or Chris Brazzell might hit. And I want to at least throw those darts. It's kind of how I'm approaching this, where, I'll treat it sort of like a portfolio, but I'm going to most definitely use landing spot to dictate some of that, because in the end, I want my dynasty asset to gain value, even if the production isn't insane. If you get that landing spot, you can at least gain some of that value that's a little bit more tangible, rather than waiting, which, to be transparent, makes Chris Bell a little bit scary because he's coming off the ACL, right? Like You do have to wait. You're not gonna be able to get him more than likely right away. And then we know how dynasty managers react. They're not very patient. And so that could be the issue. But I think Bell, maybe Brazzell, those guys, maybe a Bernard kind of belong in that next grouping. But these are profiles, Rich, in my opinion, that are usually mid-second round rookie picks, right? And we're talking about them in the late first. And that's a huge, huge problem, I think, with this class.
Yeah, and it's we're in that bucket too, where we might have a couple of running backs that get some decent capital. I mean, we'll have to wait and see.
Hope, yeah.
But it could also just be one of those things too. It's like kind of fool's gold, where like they have initial opportunity, but they're not good enough players to hold that opportunity, so they end up getting overvalued. Whereas some of these guys, you're maybe not necessarily excited about, like a Jeremy Bernard. But it's like these are guys that could potentially contribute on your roster, maybe not as starters, but be like usable players, maybe 6, 7, 8 years.
Yeah. Like Bernard's a safer prospect in my opinion. Like I think that he can play a role. Like he's a gamer. Like he's fine to draft if you're looking for that. And then you just get a bunch of these volatile X and outside perimeter wide receivers, and you're like, yeah, I mean, you might burn a late first round pick if you use it on one of those players.
Well, one of the guys that overlaps in that range at the running back position, though, that you see a wide chasm of like where he's projected to go, is Jadarian Price. I think a lot of people believe he's going to be the second running back taken, but does he go 32? Does he go top 60? Does he slide a little bit lower? Kind of is to be determined at this point. But we think he's going to be the RB2. Let's say he has a favorable spot, right? Seattle, Minnesota, so just anywhere. And he ends up being like 108, 109. How do you handle a guy like, first of all, how are you handling him anyways? Like from a Zap Mile perspective, a guy that, didn't really have a lot of production playing behind Jeremiah Love. He's going to probably have draft capital that's not elite draft capital. Like he's probably not going top 20. Yeah. I would be surprised still if he gets the 32, but it's Seattle. Like they've done weird things before. So how do you handle a guy like Jadarian Price versus that tier of guys we just talked about?
Yeah, it's tough. This is one of the toughest evaluations that we'll come across in general, as analysts. I think for even people who watch film and watch him, like it's tough for them too, because you have a smaller sample and you don't know what kind of workload he can really handle. My thing is that, okay, look at what people, because like analytically it sucks. Analytically it's not
there's no way around
for Jadarian Price, right? Like in the model I adjust for teammate strength and stuff, and if Jeremiah Love goes top 10, let's say, like it's going to really help Jadarian Price, then he's going to have his own draft capital. But look, day 2 running backs that have a best season 3% reception share, or have an adjusted yards per team play rate that's in the 10th percentile, which is another input in the running back model, they don't hit. Number one, there's not a lot of them. So maybe you can make the argument that Jadarian Price is just an outlier from that perspective, that he's getting this draft capital with such bad production that we've never really seen anything like this. Okay, I can buy that. But at the same time, there's so much projecting that you have to do for Jadarian Price to be not a usable piece for an NFL team, but a usable piece in fantasy football, because we don't know what he can handle and really what he's about. My thing is that if you look at like scouting reports about him, because like, again, analytically, everything looks bad. So I'm going to approach this and say, okay, what are others saying that are watching him? There's a lot of question marks about pass pro and even receiving for Jadarian Price. Receiving is humongously important, not only as from a prospecting standpoint, but from a fantasy football standpoint in the NFL. And so if he doesn't have that, why am I going to push him to be the RB2 in this class unless things fall a very precise way and he goes to Seattle and like there's no other day 2 running back and all the wide receivers fall in really bad spots, whatever the case may be. It's just a really hard sell for me. And the other thing too, like he was listed heavier than what he weighed at the combine. You know, he was listed at like 210, I think, and he was 203. And then you're thinking, oh, he's 203 because he's going to run a really fast 40. 449, you know, speed score of almost exactly 100, which is nothing special. Now, if you look at his explosive run rate, 88th percentile, very strong, you know, throughout college. But then you have to also wonder, like, is this because he was in a tandem and, you know, he's playing against defenses that are tired or whatever the case may be? So basically what I'm saying is that the more questions I ask about a prospect where I don't have any definitive answer, we can't just say that he can't do that. It just makes it a more volatile profile. And when there's a more volatile profile, if you're spending a mid to, you know, 109, you know, 110 type pick on that player, it's just scary. You know, there's just a lot of belief that you got to put in that player when you don't have the answers for that.
Yeah, he was a guy just like just extremely hard to find like examples of, you know, to even compare him against. You know, the closest guy I came to was Kenyon Drake, you know, who was behind Derrick Henry that year at Alabama. And Kenyon Drake turned out to have you know, this is where, you know, fantasy gamers might think of him as like a disappointing, like, oh, you said Kenyon Drake. But like Kenyon Drake had 3 usable fantasy years for us as a running back. Sometimes it's what you get. And especially in this class, if I told you you're getting 3 usable years out of any running back, you'd probably be like, you know what?
Sign me up.
yeah, sure, man. I'll take that for sure. But yeah, guys like CJ Procise, Jonathan Brooks did come up on that list. Who were kind of, you know,
Rojo came up for me.
To determine, OG Chris Henry, the running back Chris Henry. You know,
there we go. Yeah,
you know, forget about him. Just very tough guy though to evaluate. I'm gonna get you out of here with a couple more questions here. Then we'll break up because we eat a lot of the shot clock. But is there anyone that we haven't touched on that, you know, from a model perspective or just like a guy you like outright that you want to make a case for, that you're just like, hey, even if it's a 3rd round pick, you're like, in context, I know this guy's a 3rd round running pick, but like, you know what, this is a guy I'm throwing some darts on.
So I actually think the wide receiver class, in terms of where draft capital is lining up with their analytical profile, is pretty on point, like all things considered. Because usually, like, we'll see a random, you know, Matthew Golden type or something in the 1st round, where even like Denzel Boston, I don't love his profile, but it's not like horrific. It's not, you know, especially when you adjust for some of the competition he played with early on in his career. And then you get into like day 2 and day 3 guys, and you're like, well, this wide receiver class, there's not really that many players that just like stand out. So I don't really have strong convictions about many of the wide receivers in the class this year. But the running back that I want to bring up is one that I already talked about, Emmett Johnson. I'm a big Emmett Johnson guy. The ZAP model looks very closely at receiving production, and his receiving production is out of this world when you adjust for program strength and age, and when he was able to accumulate that. His best season reception share, which is one of the inputs, 94th percentile, adjusted yards per team play, 95th percentile. And then the 3rd production metric in the ZAP model is adjusted receiving yards per team pass attempt. That's 89th percentile. Now, there are some advanced metrics like, you know, explosive run rate, pretty weak, and that lines up with kind of a mediocre, you know, 4.56 40. His yards after contact, 11th percentile, not very strong at all. You had a really good nugget about Emmett Johnson, I know too, about how that might not be, you know, everything when just looking at that yards after contact per attempt number. But, you know, his avoided tackles per attempt is solid. And like, again, this archetype, Rich, like we've seen a lot of these players who have really good production profiles who are a little bit undersized, right? And they don't necessarily have crazy athleticism. Actually, a lot of the like later round running backs who end up hitting, especially in recent memory, they don't have the crazy athleticism and the crazy size. It's the Kyron Williams of the world, the Bucky Irvings of the world. I think his like a truly reasonable high-end comp for Emmett Johnson is Aaron Jones. This is very much like a good receiving back. Aaron Jones, one of the best receiving backs of like this era, right? Very, very strong receiving back, can be asked to carry a decent workload, but probably will never be the true bell cow in an offense. But we know there's a lot of fantasy value in that kind of player. And so with Johnson, I think that he can fit almost anywhere. Like he's a guy that can do it all. And that's not an easy thing to find in this class. I think there's a couple, like I like Jonah Coleman. I think he's like a a do-it-all back as well. Those are the two that, to me, outside of Jeremiah Love, check the most boxes analytically is Emmett Johnson and Jonah Coleman. But I lean more Johnson. Now, to be fair, players like Johnson and in this archetype have ruined me in the past, like a Tyler Bidet, for instance. I liked Bidet coming out, and like that's certainly where this could go for Emmett Johnson. But again, if you're, we'll see where draft capital lands. I think there's at least some chance he's like late day 2. There's at least,
but he's not going to be like a round 1-2 dynasty pick. He just won't be. So
that's what I'm hoping. Yeah, I'm hoping that doesn't happen. It's a weaker class, so you never know. But yes, I'm hoping. Like if Emmett Johnson is a round 3, even I'm okay with him even like late round 2 rookie pick with like relatively okay, 4th round draft capital or something like that, because the class is weak. Like you're getting into really crappy territory at that point. I'll be buying a lot of Emmett Johnson. I think that this profile overall, has hit in today's game well enough. And if you find a coach the way that Sean McVay looks at Kyron Williams, you find a coach that looks at Emmett Johnson that way, who's a very tough runner. It could work out for him in fantasy.
I mean, we've had a big shift in recent years in some of these spots where, these coaches don't necessarily care about the explosives as much. Now, it's great if you can have everything, right?
Course,
absolutely.
Yeah.
But explosives aren't everything. Some of these innings eaters, Ray Garvin used that phrase last week, is these guys that maybe they don't have like the upside per touch like a Mike Washington, but these guys that are more boring and just kind of do things at a baseline level are things that coaches do stock. And we've seen that it's the whole thing everyone's arguing about, like with Chris Rodriguez and Bashal Tutin, but like even last year with Bashal Tutin and Travis Etienne, like Travis Etienne was a guy that wasn't very great last year on a per carry basis. Like,
yeah,
just was a baseline average for in a producer. Kyron Williams has been like that over his career. Ramondre Stevenson and Travion Henderson, the back half of the year, like, because Henderson, we thought he wasn't going to be able to be put back in the bottle, right? Like after that Bucks game, you're like, it's out. Like there's no way they can go back to Ramondre, but Ramondre just did all the little things that coaches like, that they were like, we'll sacrifice some of the explosives because I know where the floor is. And I do think that has some value in this draft class for guys like Coleman and Emmett Johnson, to kind of at least just kind of like have longevity in this class, even if they do not have like the spike capital of some of the other guys, like a Price or a Mike Washington that could go ahead of them based on the upside that those players have. And even a Nicholas Singleton, who I said had that really good age-adjusted production and then just had a disaster of a year this past year. Still scored touchdowns, so he had that going for him. But we're a little over an hour here, so I could talk to you for hours and do this, but I've been getting people out of here on a non-football question. Ooh. So the surprise to you don't have it. But you, for people that know you bounced around. You went from Pittsburgh, then you went to Cincinnati, and now you're in North Carolina. So I'm going to put you on the spot. We're going to play a little F, Marry, Kill right now with Primani Bros.
Oh, man.
Skyline Chili.
Okay.
And Cookout.
Okay. Very easy to kill Skyline Chili. Very, very easy to kill Skyline Chili. I don't know how or why anyone sober is consuming that food. So Skyline Chili is killed. I will F Cookout because I think the milkshakes are especially good for that like little treat. So you can F Cookout, and we will marry Primanti Brothers because that's the hometown. That's the OG for me.
I love it. Yeah, and I almost included Bojangles there, but they're two more of a national. You got Cookout's the more Carolina.
Bojangles though, that chicken 4-piece chicken supreme, man, you can't beat Bojangles.
I love it, man. Listen, I appreciate your time. Let everyone know exactly what's going on. If they want to read more about the Zap model, if somehow they've been in a cave and this is the first time they're ever next to you, where can they grab it? Is there anything in the 11th hour they can get?
Yeah, man. You can get on lateround.com. And if you purchase before the draft, you'll get the pre-draft version. But if you purchase after the draft, you'll only get the post-draft version. And I'm working all Thursday through Saturday and updating blurbs so that only an hour or two after the NFL draft ends, you'll get an updated guide with all of the blurbs updated and stuff for each player with landing spot and the new rankings and such. It's kind of a hectic Saturday, but it's worth it in the end. But check it all out, lateround.com.
I love it. And yeah, before we wrap up, make sure you go over to sharpfootball.com. Check out our 2026 draft kit as well. Everything I've been working on in season is there. It's the fastest way to get ready for your drafts. And while you're there, You can get our free newsletter too. Every piece of content we put out, plus exclusive discounts for subscribers. That'll get directly sent to your email. So check that out. I'll be back next week with one more pre-draft show. That's going to be with Matt Harmon. We'll probably be a little wide receiver driven. You just had Harmon on your show. Definitely go check that out on JJ's channel. And, if you're checking out JJ's channel on YouTube as well, it would be nice too if you gave us a little link and subscribe as well. Other than that, good luck, everyone. Stay blessed. We'll be back next week.